I think anyone who watches my videos or live streams regularly knows that I'm not very hyped about the upcoming God of War live action show. Despite being a huge fan of the series, I find the idea of adapting such a story-focused game to the small screen somewhat redundant. If you want to watch the God of War movie, just play the game. I'm not saying this to diminish God of War 2018's success. Sure, I prefer the more gameplay-focused Greek saga, but I also think these movie-like games have their place in gaming. When they successfully combine gameplay with storytelling, they can be experiences that stay with you forever, and God of War 2018 is definitely one of the best cases of this happening. Which is why I'm very weary of the idea of retelling this story in a new medium. Because what exactly will the writers of the show do to make this story last for 8 or 10 episodes? A big reason the story of God of War 2018 works is because it follows Cory Barlog's philosophy of telling simple stories with complex characters. The goal for Kratos and Atreus remains the same from beginning to end. Reach the highest peak in all the realms to spread Faye's ashes. The real meat of the story is seeing the slow growth both Kratos and Atreus experience along this journey. But it also means that there's a lot of time spent killing regular enemies. Something that doesn't really get old in video games, but you can't really capture the same magic in the TV show. I'm sure they will make these enemy encounters in the show exciting to watch, but they'll never feel as exciting as killing them yourself with controller in hand. For example, you all know that a big complaint in God of War 2018 was how many trolls you had to fight. Even though many fans hated the trolls, they were still doable because at least they were fun to fight. The same can be said if we're forced to watch 10 live action sequences of Kratos and Atreus fighting trolls. The writers of the show need to add something else to compensate for the long stretches of gameplay that don't translate well to live action shows. But I also don't want them to add new characters and plot lines that would affect what I think already is a masterpiece of a story. So what can they do then? Well, recently the showrunner for the God of War show said something that might have been a hint. In an interview with IGN, he was asked if the show would include some scenes showing Kratos before he arrived in Scandinavia. To which he replied by saying, well, maybe. You'll have to wait and see it. Now, this at first might seem like traditional marketing speak. They want to generate excitement about their show by purposely being vague. But what's interesting about this question is that the game itself doesn't leave much room to be vague. Because if they're retelling God of War 2018's story, his answer should have been a simple yes. Because there's already a scene in God of War 2018 that shows Kratos' life in Greece. Imagine if he had been asked if Kratos and Atreus would meet Freya in the show, and then he replied with, well, maybe, you'll have to wait and see it. No, we don't. If they're retelling the story of God of War 2018, we should expect to see both Freya and at least a scene with Zeus and young Kratos beating the crap out of him. So why is the showrunner being coy about this question? My theory is that this show will have some new flashback scenes that will show some of Kratos' life before he arrived in Scandinavia. Now, having new scenes in the show isn't necessarily surprising. As I said earlier, they have to add something new to compensate for the long stretches of gameplay that don't translate well to a show. And this is something that The Last of Us show has already done. There are plenty of new scenes in that show that simply don't exist in the main game, like the scientist TV interview about the virus. Scenes like these were added because they too needed to find a way around many long gameplay sections, and they did so by adding things that the new medium would benefit from. Scenes that would give more exposition about this world that there wasn't much room for in the game. And fans absolutely love it. Well, at least that was the reception for most scenes. The point is, I don't think it's crazy to expect new scenes in the God of War adaptation. The real question is, which new scenes are we going to see? I think it's likely that we'll see a couple of flashback scenes of Kratos and Faye before the events of God of War 2018. Maybe we'll see the moment when he met her, which according to lore resulted in a fight between the two. We'll probably also see some new scenes showcasing the weeks before Atreus was born, and even after he was born. I know there was a comic released before God of War 2018 that covers some of these events, but it would be nice if they could expand them more on the show. But by far, the time period I'm most interested in is the years that Kratos was just wandering the Earth. Look, if you ask me, I would have personally loved it if they make this into a game, but lately I don't think this will ever happen. Because I'm just not expecting Kratos in this time period to have gone on world-changing adventures like he did during the Greek and Norse periods. I mean, in the Fallen God comics, he did interact with an Egyptian god and maybe even visited the higher plane of existence. But the core focus of that comic wasn't necessarily the action the series is known for. Instead, it was the quiet moments where Kratos begins to experience some growth. Something that wouldn't really make for a fun game, but great for a story. And I think this is something the God of War show will take advantage of. They know that fans of the series desperately want to see what Kratos was doing during this time. They will probably show a scene of him coming back to life after the events of God of War 3, and hopefully explain the mystery of how the Blades of Chaos began to follow him. But I think a flashback that we're definitely going to see is that of the mysterious hooded woman, one of the most intriguing mysteries in the God of War series. This is an account that we learned about in the official novelization of God of War 2018, which seems to show that Kratos' arrival in Scandinavia wasn't directed by fate, but instead by someone who had a vested interest in the matter. Kratos held a defensive stance, his back against a rock wall, his blades out to defend him from a trio of yowling wolves twice his height. One black with verdant eyes, one white, and the third grey. The white wolf advanced as if on command. The movement revealed a woman behind the beast, clad in a long cloak and cowl obscuring much of her face. Her raised arms sent all three creatures airborne to attack. "Who are you?" Kratos screamed with all the force he could muster just as the black wolf ripped into his thigh to drag him away. To this day, we still don't know who this mysterious woman is. Why did she bring Kratos to Scandinavia? Who were the wolves that she had with her? Questions like these remain to be answered. Now, you may say that I'm putting too much weight on something that can only be found in the novel, meaning that this account isn't really canon. After all, the previous God of War novels have said things that flat out contradict things in the games. So why think that this novel is any different? Well, the thing that's different about this novel is that it was written shortly after the release of God of War 2018, and given that the writer of the novel is Cory Barlog's father, I wouldn't be surprised if Cory at the very least was consulted for lore questions. So when I read in the novel that a mysterious hooded woman brought Kratos to Scandinavia, I'm inclined to believe that this is important to the story Cory has planned for the series. And if it's canon, this show is going to be the place where we might learn more about it. I say this because there's a moment in the novel that has given them a blueprint for where to show at least one of these flashback scenes. The account I read for you was a dream Kratos had at the beginning of the story, which I see no reason why they wouldn't include in the show as well. But later in the novel, when Kratos and Atreus find Skull and Hati's puzzle, their design reminds Kratos of the encounter he had with the mysterious hooded woman. So, will we learn the mystery behind the hooded woman? It's hard to say at this stage, but I think if we don't see this moment in the show, it means that it was probably never canon, or at the very least it was quietly retconned. Whatever the case is with this mystery, there is one thing I'm sure of. There have to be new scenes in the God of War show. There's just too many long gameplay stretches that need to be compressed for a viewing experience. And they also need to add something new for fans who have already experienced this story. So let me know which of these scenes you would like to see. Do you want to see more Odin? Thor? Maybe you would like to see an explanation about the mask and where it came from. Whatever your thoughts and theories are, make sure to leave them in the comments section below. As always, I want to give a big thanks to all of my YouTube and Patreon members for their monthly support of the channel. I would also like to thank all of you who like and share my videos. It may not seem like much, but trust me, it really does help. And with that said, thanks for watching. And remember, go forth in the name of Olympus.